Thank you, Southwest Writers, for inviting me today. And all you people out there in Zoom land, oh, I'm so sorry you're not here in person because I love a live audience and I'm not real. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
You can hear me back there, but you can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like Verizon. Can you hear me now? But I'm not on top of a mountain. I am really excited to be here because I think I've stumbled on something that it's inherent for all good writers. And I put this together in my head about 2 years ago. It just all came crashing in. So, do your characters misbehave? Boy, mine do all over the place. But before we dig into that, I want to ask you some questions. Who here has repaired something recently? Repaired something recently? Brenda,
Yeah.
wait. I guess that you have the tools and I'm suspecting that you have reasonable skills. Did you plan on how long it would take you to repair it?
Yeah.
And what did you repair?
Not about the microwave that the interior had fractured.
How long did it take?
2 minutes, once I went and got it severed.
And is that what you expected it to take?
Yeah.
2 minutes? Good for you. Who else? Who else has repaired something? Dan?
I helped my son rebuild the heads on his 77 Corvette that he just bought.
Wow. I assume that you all had the tools and you felt like you were reasonably skilled enough to do this.
He did.
Did you project how long that would take you?
I stopped doing that years ago because it's always about by a factor of 3 more than whatever I think it'll take.
Yeah, okay. Who has done some renovation, whether it's a room or a closet or a barn or a chicken house? Yes, Deb.
3 times what you project and 3 times the cost.
Why does this happen? Okay, let's change questions. How many of you who've gone to college have changed your majors? Okay. How many of you have changed your majors more than once? 3 times? This is what happened to me. I started out in fine arts. Yay, drawing, painting, sculpting. That's what I wanted to do. But I needed a sellable profession. And I know my skill level wasn't going to let me quit a day job. So I transferred to something much more sellable, pharmacy. Wow. Now, isn't that a great sellable profession? But let me ask you, who wants a creative pharmacist? You don't want that, people. You really do not want a creative pharmacist. So I thought I better rethink this. And I decided a sellable profession that would allow me to really create would be boring education. So that's what I've done for years and years and years. Now, this is something that I found out. I kept asking questions of people. I always ask way too many questions, but I asked musicians, architects, contractors, any type of creative person I could find. And I asked them, when they started a project, did they have a plan? And did that plan turn out like they expected at the end of their project? 100% of them said, yes, we had a plan, and no, it was different when we finished it. So what is happening here? When you start out, well, let me just back up. I'm going to say, and this is what I fully believe. Can you hear me?
Wondering about if the people on Zoom can.
Well, let's take this off.
Oh, I didn't realize you had one. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear? Okay. So this is what I believe. I believe the creative process is a petri dish for growing unintended consequences. I really believe that. The creative process is a petri dish for growing unintended consequences. And these unintended consequences can be sometimes, occasionally, they can be disastrous. But more often than not, they're subtle. You almost don't even notice them. But frequently, they'll enhance what you're doing, and they'll just make it sparkle. They'll make you so happy with the results. So it runs the gamut there. So as a writer, and I'm going to assume that you have the tools of grammar and what you need that way, and you have reasonable skills, you know, character, plotting, setting, etc. So as a writer with that, you're probably going to experience some unintended consequences. And here is a warning for you. Don't fight it. If you're an over-controlling person and you're writing, and some of these consequences just end up, I'm going to show you what happens in my writing and how I handle it so you'll know what I'm talking about. But don't eliminate those totally. If you do, you're going to end up with something that reads like a textbook. And I can say this because I've judged hundreds and hundreds of books over the last few years for writing contests. And nothing breaks my heart more than to pick up a book that I get to read free, because I'm judging it. And I'm so excited because the premise sounds so exciting and wonderful and well thought out. And the back of the book cover is so well written. I think, wow, this is going to be a winner. I open it up and I start reading, and it's just nothing but boring. It's like a textbook. All the life has been sucked out of it because it's been over-controlled. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. I cannot think of anything that's going to impact your writing more than unintended consequences. And I'm going to show you how that works. And then we're going to kind of back down and dissect it and see how the science of this happens to create unintended consequences. And then we're going to talk about why, when you leave here today, I hope you understand that that scary AI out there, it's limited and it's got its problems, and it can't play in our creative writing because you guys are going to outshine it every single time. So how many of you, I'm so hyperactive, I wander all the time, and I'm supposed to stay in line of the, so how many of you planned your life or planned to do something in your life and you ended up doing something totally different? Has that happened to any of you? Well, see, we have unintended consequences all over the place. In 1989, my husband and I bought a plot of land down in on the east side of the Manzano Mountains in the foothills. And we thought, this will be good. We have time to build our retirement home before we actually retire. And then we will retire. And my husband, who's a computer programmer, said, I can do all the genealogy I want down there undisturbed. So he has an office where he was going to do genealogy. I'll have a studio where I can do painting and drawing and sculpting, a potter's wheel and a kiln, which I have. So I can do all the fine arts that I want to do. Well, his dream came true. Mine didn't. Mine changed totally. And this is why. Before I retired, my mother died. And when she died, she gifted me with her older sister. And her older sister was in the 80s, late 80s, almost 90. And she was cantankerous and obnoxious. And she scared the living hell out of me because I didn't know much about her. However, she come to the little town where my mother was living and took care of her in the last stages of cancer. So I owed her a big debt. And since I was the only living female relative in her family, we all know what females do. We take care of people. I got her. She started smoking when she woke up, and she didn't quit smoking till she went to sleep about 2 o'clock in the morning because she read in bed and smoked in my house. I can't stand cigarette smoke. I have asthma. My air was blue. She also turned it blue with her language. She started drinking at noon, probably about an hour after she got up, after she had her donut. Plain cake, please. And it was rum and beer for lunch, and then rum and Coke, clear on up until, well, she probably turned out the light at 2 o'clock in the morning. Brilliant woman, voracious reader. I couldn't keep her in, I didn't have enough books to keep her, and I have lots of books. She read everything inside. And I was an administrator, please don't hold this against me, an administrator for Albuquerque Public Schools at that time. I was in the middle of a federal lawsuit because I had said that a young man who was 14 years old could not bring a loaded gun on campus. This is before Columbine. And I provided an education for him off campus at your taxpayer dollar, one-on-one tutoring, just exactly what the federal guidelines say you have to do. I didn't deprive him of an education. And the Civil Liberties Union said I was really picking on this poor little guy, me being the big institution. So I was the expert witness for a whole friggin' school year. And this is when I got my aunt. And I thought, I can't handle one more thing, because I also had a big volunteer commitment for the Loveless Respiratory Animal Research Institute on the far reaches of Sandia Labs. And that was something I had to do twice a month, and I was committed to doing that. I really could not handle one more thing. I could not handle, and then I had this woman telling all and the reason why I didn't know much about her is because she had run away from home when she was 16, from Minneapolis to Chicago in 1923. And she wanted to be an entertainer. And as an entertainer, she was a flapper during Al Capone's time. It was so dangerous. And she had all these outrageous stories that she would tell my husband. I'd walk in the room and she'd quiet down because she thought that I would be shocked. But I have napkins and matchbooks full of little notes that I took because it was just too interesting. Anyway, she died. I retired. We moved to our mountain house. My husband did his genealogy. And I'm standing in my studio looking at all this art stuff that I couldn't wait to get a hold of. And I thought, no, I have this story that's too good to be told, not to be told. And I need to write this story. The universal theme of a professional woman so overworked she can't handle one more thing. That's a universal theme for us women. I thought, this is too good. So what if I made the protagonist an overworked, obsessive compulsive biomedical animal research scientist in a research institute that's rife with corporate espionage and murders everywhere. And all of a sudden, someone drops this old ex-flapper into her life for her to take care of. She really can't handle one more thing. What a great story. And shoot, no problem to write a book. You just sit down on page 1 and you start writing your book, right? Piece of cake. Everybody can write a book, right? John in Zoomland, stick with it. It took me 10 years to get my first book published. You can do it too, Guy. Here's the big unintended consequences happened all the way through there. But what I want you to know about this one is I never intended to be a writer. I never wanted to be a writer. That was the last thing I wanted to do. But this book won so many awards that my readers said, we want to know about the young girl that ran away at 16 in 1923 to Chicago. And they said, give us that book. And I thought, wait, no, this is the only book I was, and they said, no, we want. So I knew nothing but about this much about prohibition and even less about the Roaring 20s. So it's research, research, research. Well, doing my research, I got into the archives of the Minneapolis newspapers in 1923. And I came across this little saying, this little article, it was 2 sentences. In North Minneapolis, a trolley driver reported a naked man riding around on his trolley. I have no need for that. That was just interesting, a little smile for the day. I just go on with my research. So think back, especially you women, to when you were 16. And your mom said she was going to take you somewhere to be with some of her friends, to console one of her friends' husbands who mysteriously disappeared. And you needed to go with her that night because you needed to learn some social graces. Well, I know as a 16-year-old, I would have rebelled. I would have said, no, no, no. Well, Kathleen's mother said, Kathleen, come on, we've got to go console Mrs. Davison. Her husband has disappeared and we don't know what's going on, but she's just so distraught. So Kathleen had to go with her mother to visit Kathleen as a young 16-year-old. She had to go with her mother, and she just knew that that house would be full of really old people that she'd have nothing in common with. My goodness, they'd probably be even 40 or older, just really old people. So she walks in with her mother to the, make sure. Okay, she walks in with her mother, and all these old 40-year-olds are standing around talking and chatting and laughing, and nobody's consoling Mrs. Davison. So her mother goes over to console Mrs. Davison, and Kathleen's not about to get even close to that woman. She's watching all these people that are laughing and having a good time and eating all the food that they brought for Mrs. Davison. And she doesn't know what to do with herself. And she looks around and she sees this really old witchy looking woman sitting over in the corner. And the old witchy woman kind of waves to her and points to an empty chair. So Kathleen feels like she has no choice. So she goes over, she slides into the empty chair next to this woman. And the woman's name is Mrs. Temple. And she strikes up a conversation with young Kathleen about the other people. I'm going to read you just a little bit. Kathleen swallowed hard and waited for the woman to speak again. When she didn't, Kathleen hunted for something neutral to say. Where is Mr. Temple? Any man willing to take on Mrs. Temple must be nuts. Where he needs to be. The woman squinted at Kathleen. His undoing happened when he left all his clothes scattered all over the living room of Mr. and Mrs. Granger. Of course, he didn't know the Grangers. None of us did. But it did cause quite a stir. Do you mean all his clothes? Indeed, I do. The Grangers called the police, and everyone searched the Granger house and yard and their boathouse for a dead body. They shoveled and hoed up the vegetable garden too. Too bad he wasn't there. Did they find him? Kathleen hated being like the other chatty people who said they'd come to console Mrs. Davison. Some trolley driver had some good sense to call headquarters and let them know that they had a naked man. He had a naked man driving around in his car. The woman nodded to herself. Kathleen knew her mouth was open. So was mine. I didn't want a naked man on a trolley in this story. Mr. Temple told the police he didn't know where his clothes were. He had to get home, and the fastest way was to take the trolley. And he argued with the trolley driver over the fare. He told the trolley driver he had no pockets, so he couldn't pay the fare. Well, what the? I don't want this naked man on a trolley in this book. It has no place for that. I have nothing to do with this. I don't know where this is going. I didn't understand that man, even though he was never on stage and rarely mentioned again, became the evil, sinister underpinnings of some of the darkest parts of this book. And it tied this book together. I had no idea. How does that happen? We're going to find out. So Finish that one. Everybody says, well, we need one more. I said, no. They said, yes, we do. They said, we need to know what happened. Okay. So in the first book, the scientist woman who was too busy for anything neglected her husband, and her marriage was really going down the chutes. And Kathleen, the old ancient flapper, was trying to be a marriage counselor and said, sweetie, you just got to pay more attention to your husband, make more time for him, which she had no time for anything, so she wasn't going to do that. She kept saying, take him on a vacation, take him on a vacation, take him to the Caribbean. I lived in the Caribbean for 6 months, and there's a wonderful beach. You can go dancing in the moonlight, blah, 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 blah. Kathleen was, yeah. Beth was like, yeah. I don't have time for that. That was the first book. Here's the book where Beth finally listens to the old flapper and takes her husband on his dream vacation to the Caribbean, which turns into a lethal nightmare. And one of the reasons why it didn't work so well for Beth, the research scientist, is even though superficially she said, we are going to go on this wonderful vacation, she really wanted to use it as a research project to learn more about this cantankerous ex-flapper woman who lived there for 6 months. So she was going to send her husband off on fishing boats so she could do research, which really didn't make her husband happy. So the very first full day that they're there, the researcher, Beth, gets mugged. She has her camera and she's trying to take pictures of her husband. They're in St. Thomas at this time in the plaza, and she's trying to take pictures of her husband over by the courthouse. He's across the street, and she's taking pictures, and the thug comes up, grabs her camera, and her husband runs back and is consoling her. This is where this starts. My watch, Harold. Anything but my watch. Her eyes filled. I'll buy you another one. Mother's watch. It can't be replaced. She wanted to throw something. There'd be a real shame in this, an old woman said, and picked up her large cloth bag, shaking her head. That good man not be himself no more. You know him? Beth said. The child next to the old woman whispered, he's bad. He's the one who made my mother disappear. Beth stared at the girl. What? Hush, you don't know that for a fact, child. The stout woman fumbled in her cloth bag, pulled her hand out, and pressed something into Beth's palm. Then she shuffled off towards the open market. Beth opened her fingers and saw a small brown nut. It lay in her hand, but she looked. My rings! He took my rings too. Damn it, Harold. How did he do that? She pulled her lips in and looked back where the man had gone. And then she took the nut and she flung it as hard as she could. Where'd the nut come from? I don't want no nut in my story. Where did this nut come from? I had not even been thinking about a nut. However, it did make it to the cover. So what in the heck is this nut about? So when I wrote this, I thought, what? What nut? What kind of a nut is it? I don't know. I thought, well, no problem. That's a scene. It's over. I'm going to go on. That night, the nut shows up in their hotel room. The nut keeps showing up. The nut won't leave them alone. The nut is all through the whole blasted story. So I had to do something about this third time it showed up. Since Beth is a scientist, she would know what kind of a nut it was. And she would know properties of the nut, and maybe finding out a little bit about the nut. Well, what nut do I know that's kind of hard and brown? And well, what about the buckeye? But the buckeye's not a nut, it's a seed. But I don't care. It's going to be a buckeye. That's an Ohio thing. And that's what I know. And I know it has a brown spot in it. I know it's full of tannins, and that's good enough for the scientist. So she's telling her husband, it's not a nut, it's a seed, and it's full of tannins, and it's not worth eating, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know much about this. I don't know if any of you know this, But after the book was finished, do any of you know Betty Palmer from Opposite up in Taos? Well, she called me and she says, I just read your last book and I want you to come up and do a book talk. She says, oh my goodness, I still have my grandfather's Buckeye. I said, you what? And she said, oh yeah. She says, he kept it with him every day of his life because he said it brought him such good luck. I said, really? And then my son-in-law read my book and he says, oh, Charlene, he says, you know, my uncle always kept a Buckeye in his pocket when he went fishing. I said, to catch fish? He said, no, his arthritis hurt him so bad he couldn't cast unless he had the Buckeye. Okay. I thought, I better go on and ask Mr. Google again more about this nut. I found out that a casino in Las Vegas a couple of years ago ordered 40,000 Buckeyes to hand out as a promotional product to their customers so they would have good luck gambling. All right. So my characters always misbehave, and sometimes they're not even a character. Sometimes it's a MacGuffin. That nut is a MacGuffin. It has value only to the characters of the book. It had no value for me, but it did make it. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings and the Ring, but it did make it to the cover because it plays an important part all the way through my book. Who knew? Don't ignore those unintended consequences. Sometimes they have benefits for you you don't even understand until you finish the book. All right. My husband, doing genealogy, burst into my room, my studio, says, Charlene, look at this. I said, what? He says, this little paragraph. He says, I think this is your 5th great grandfather, and he's a sleaze. Okay. And the paragraph went something like this. In 1644, right there is a problem. Who knows anything about 1644? In 1644, Giles Brent, a gentleman, aged 39 or so, marries a 9-year-old Indian princess. What? Oh, well, I had to read more. You can't let something like that go. Leonard Calvert, the governor of the Maryland Territory, and his good friend, spinster Lady Margaret Brent, are the guardians of the 9-year-old Indian princess. What? I mean, there are red flags all over this. First of all, the territory of Maryland was a rough place with a lot of Indian raids, and it was pretty much male-dominated. It's probably at minimum 7 men to every woman there. The women and children kept dying. So it was, why would the most powerful man of that territory have his good friend, a spinster woman, when women were not considered anything more than chattel? Women usually did not have a voice, and they were not valued at all, except to be a helpmate, to raise children, cook meals, to clean, you know, kind of like we know women do. Well, this is quite a story. He says, my husband said, I thought you'd be interested in it. So I started researching, and I thought, well, I know nothing about England. Well, I knew all about it up until the 1600s, after Queen Elizabeth died. I knew Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth I, but the 1600s, no, I knew nothing about their history, so I had to do a lot of research. And I knew nothing about pre-colonial Maryland, so I had to research there. And what I learned is, if you are researching specific gentlemen or noblemen of the time, there's abundant research. But I couldn't find anything out about Margaret Brent, the sister, because she left no primary source materials, no diaries, no journals, no letters. And if a woman of that time, no matter if she's a lady or not, if she's not left any primary source material, you're not going to find anything out about her, because the men didn't talk. The men didn't write about those kind of women. So anyway, I'm still researching Giles Brent and Governor Calvert, and I can find nothing that relates to the 9-year-old Indian princess and that marriage, except on Wikipedia. You know how that is. Yeah. Well, maybe Maryland. So I went to the historical archives in Maryland. And way back in a little tab that says careers, and I don't know why I clicked on that. I'm just nosy. I just have to know everything. I clicked on it. And boom, there are 134 court cases that Lady Spinster Margaret Brent presented in front of Governor Calvert in his provincial court. Wow. And they're all summarized on little index cards. And it's in the language that they used back then, which, believe me, it is a foreign language. I didn't know what a kind was for the longest time. And then I found out it's a cow. Oh, well, there are a lot of little words like that that I had no idea what they meant. And I had to search and search and search. So all of a sudden, and COVID hit. So I'm on my phone and I'm deleting all my engagements and I'm smiling ear to ear because now I have time to sit at home and research, because believe me, it would take me a year to research all this stuff. And the story, Unintended Consequence, is no longer about a man who's 39 years old who marries a 9-year-old. The story is about this really independent, powerful woman. If it weren't for her, Maryland would still be part of Virginia. She built a fort. She educated that Indian princess, and she represented Governor Calvert and the gentleman. They paid her to be their attorney. She seemed to have a voice and went to court for those that did not have a voice, a remarkable woman. And she asked for the vote 200 years before, twice, 200 years before Susan B. Anthony. I had to write this story. This is an incredible story. I found out so much. And there's so much about the origins of our founding nation here. I knew about separation. I knew about religious tolerance. I did not know about separation of church and state. And it just all fell into place. So this story, it really was an act of love that I had to write this. But again, those unintended consequences have just plagued me. And I had to start thinking, what on earth was happening? What causes these unintended consequences? And as an educator, I started giving it really, really serious thought. And when you're creating, think about it. That is a learning process, because you start somewhere familiar and you go to someplace new, someplace you've not been before. That's what creation is. Starting here and going to someplace new. So this creation process is really, it's kind of key. Like I said earlier, I really believe that creation is a petri dish for growing unintended consequences. So the old thought about 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that we all have a hard time letting go of, the left brain and the right brain, left brain and right brain, that's kind of out the window, people. We have new scanning devices that can see when things are lighting up all over you. The creative process is no longer left in right brain. It's a total brain neurology department. It's a total brain and neurology. When we write deployment, when we write, our subconscious gathers and stores and organizes our sensations and our thoughts and experiences that we have, research that we do, whatever we do, it's all gathered and stored and it must interact and blend with the nuances and the idiosyncrasies of our settings, characters, plot, dialogue. That must be what's happening. I can't, right now, I cannot see any other explanation for it because our bodies are so wired for information gathering and sensation that we have all this going on. And the best part about this is this is available to all the creative people. But if you have a closed mind, focused system, brain, it's not going to be there. You see where I'm going with this? So I want to read, I want to, the last few things I want to say is about the research, and I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm going to read this. But if what Albert North says is true, then AI is in trouble. And he's a mathematician, a philosopher, and quantum physics. And he says, and this kind of sounds like Schrodinger's cat, but he says, the role of the observer is crucial in determining the physical nature of what's being observed. Wow. So this is kind of really weird science, people. The role of the observer is crucial in determining the physical nature of what's being observed. And he finishes by saying, having absolute knowledge of something is impossible. Math is he's a mathematician. Math is unreliable. And they're finding out that now that some AI mathematical programs are degrading because they're going back and copying themselves like an old copying machine, you know. And he says, language is incapable. And I thought that that was kind of interesting, especially for some of those things that just come out of the blue. We have no idea where they come from. Are really impressive. I think this man is so impressive. I read some of his articles from a Dartmouth physicist, Marcello Gleiser. He did a study with a Stanford anthropologist who studied the brain, Tanya Luhrmann. And they titled their study, Experience of the Sacred. These were subjects who had weird or strange, remarkable events that would happen to them that were so out of nowhere that they couldn't explain them. So they tucked them away, never talked about them, and they were soon forgotten. And according to Marcello, they know there's at least 10% of the people that do that, and they suspect 70% of us do that. And I bet you can all think of times when something really just had no reason for happened. Like you're thinking really hard about someone and you're worried about them, and all of a sudden they call you out of the blue. Little things like that. I had an acquaintance, and I could have sworn someone told me that she was really sick and dying from some fatal disease, and I didn't know what it was. And for a couple of weeks, I felt so badly, and I didn't know how to approach her, so I didn't. And then I got a call one day saying that Yolanda died. And I said, yes, I knew she was sick. They said, oh, she wasn't sick. She died of a heart attack last night. You know, things like that. How do you explain that? That's what they are researching. And in conclusion, the very last one is, here's what we do know. This is Scott Kaufman of Scientific American, who says, and I'm quoting here, it's an exciting time for neuroscience of creativity, as long as you can ditch the outdated notion of left brain, right brain research of 20 years ago. And you are willing to embrace the messiness his words, of the creative process and the dynamic brain. So what I want you to remember when you walk out of here is, what does the A stand for artificial intelligence? AI, yeah. So embrace all of your creative unintended consequences and make each of your stories be full of delightful surprises. Thank you.